This is an NBC News special report. Here's Hallie Jackson.
Good day. We are coming back on the air with a major update. NBC News has just confirmed the identities of the 2 American hostages released by Hamas terrorists today. They are Judith and Natalie Renan, mother and daughter from Illinois. They're among about 200 hostages who were kidnapped when Hamas invaded Israel in that terror attack just about 2 weeks ago. And like with so many affected by this deadly war, this has also hit close to home for us here at NBC News. The 2 women released, the 2 people released, are related to our colleague and former Tel Aviv bureau chief Martin Fletcher. Martin is joining us now. And Martin, this is obviously incredible news for your family. Tell us what you know, how you learned of this, and any other details you can.
Well, to be honest, Hallie, things are changing so quickly, and there's so much confusing information coming from all sources. My wife has been in touch with her family directly in Israel, and she's been told that the hostages are now with the Red Cross inside Israel, and that's as much as we know. I don't know whether the family has been officially informed. I would imagine they have been, but I haven't heard that directly. But my wife has been in touch with the family. The hostages with the Red Cross inside Israel, obviously a huge sigh of relief, and at the same time concerned that there's so many more hostages. And the question being, is this the beginning of a prisoner swap of some kind, a love swap?
As you're speaking, Martin, we're showing some of the photographs of your relatives on the left side of the screen here. Can you tell us, for people who may not be familiar, who they are, how they're related to you and your wife?
Judith and Natalie, they're from Evanston, Illinois. They are my cousin's son's wife's family. So it's not a very close relationship, but it's we're a tight knit family, like many families, and you don't have to be a close relative to be concerned about your family members. They're not people that I know well. I've met them a few times at family events, weddings, and things like that. I can't speak about who they really are. In terms of their personalities and their characters. But I can tell you one thing, the families rallied around them in an extraordinary manner, hoping that this would happen. And the fact that it actually happened is it's a miracle.
It's an incredible miracle for your family here, Martin. Do you have, and I know that it sounds like details are coming in sort of piecemeal here and there with lots of changes, but do you have any insight into the circumstances of their release? Any indication of how this actually happened?
No, I don't. Presumably, it's part of some kind of deal. I mean, nothing happens in this part of the world without a quid pro quo. So for Hamas to suddenly release 2 people, not sure what provoked that all of a sudden. Was it a response suddenly to publicity? Was it a response to President Biden's speech? Was it part of a calculated plan? We don't know, but probably, it could be a combination of those things. We do know that there was talk about a prisoner swap, women and children of the hostages being swapped for women and children, security prisoners held in Israeli jails. Israel holds 30 women and about 120 young people, minors. So that it may be part of that. But one thing I've got to point out, and I hate to throw cold water on things, it's not over for my family. This morning, one cousin was buried this morning, also killed in Kibbutz Be'eri in the south, and his wife is also a hostage and still a hostage in Gaza. So, this is like crazy how much is happening at the same time. I just hope it's part of a larger prisoner swap and that more prisoners will be released. And there's a small window of opportunity once Israel's ground invasion begins. If indeed it does, I can imagine that any negotiations would come to a sudden halt.
Martin, I'm going to ask you to stand by for just a second here. I'll let you check your phone, but I want to bring in our NBC News foreign correspondent, Josh Letterman, who is live for us in Israel. Josh, what other details are we learning here?
Well, we are waiting a briefing from the Israeli military really at any moment, Hallie. But in the meantime, we have just heard from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office in a statement in which they are not only confirming the identities of these 2 Americans, Martin Fletcher's relatives, Judith Ra'anan and Natalie Shoshana Ra'anan, but the Israeli Prime Minister's office is also giving us new details now about their location and how they got out of the Gaza Strip. They say that they were met at the Gaza border by Brigadier General Gal Hirsch, along with forces from Israel's military. And they were received by those forces at the border and are at this moment, according to Bibi Netanyahu's office, they are on their way to a meeting point in the center of Israel, where they are expected to be reunited with their family members, who are, of course, desperately waiting to see them in person and to see that they are both alive and well. The Prime Minister's office
Josh,
going
I'm
on.
ask you to give a second here, because we're going to listen into this IDF briefing for just a minute.
October 7th, Gal Hirsch, who's in charge of all the MIAs and hostages, along with the IDF and security forces, greeted them, and they are now on their way to see their family. The family members of Yehudit and Natalie were informed by the IDF regarding all the details, and we're going to keep informing the Israelis and others about other details. The entire security establishment, as well as the IDF, will continue to do everything they can in order to bring back those who are missing and to bring back the hostage, to find those who are missing and to bring back the hostages home. Hamas is currently trying to show itself to the world as if they had returned these hostages for humanitarian reasons. But this is a murderous terrorist organization that is still holding on to babies, children, women, elderly, who were abducted into the Gaza Strip, and they're continuing to commit war crimes against all of humanity. In the north of Israel, over the past 24 hours, we killed a terrorist that fired at IDF soldiers near the town, near the community of Margaliot, and 4 others who tried to shoot at Israelis and security forces. In Gaza, we are continuing to our attacks and assaults all the time. We are targeting all those who participated in the planning of the horrendous events of Saturday, October 7th. We killed the person in Hamas who is in charge of developing their means of warfare. We will continue to target members of this organization wherever they're at, and we are gearing for the next stages of this war. The war will continue for many more weeks, and we have some difficult challenges and difficult times ahead of us. Currently, hundreds and thousands of reservists, as well as IDF soldiers and members of the Israeli security establishment, are at work. They come from all parts of Israeli society. They are all together for the state of Israel. Any questions, please? Sir, are there any contacts for the release of other hostages? Does it have to do with the issue of humanitarian aid that is supposed to enter the Gaza Strip, for example, humanitarian aid in exchange for the release of some of the women hostages? We are currently in an effort. It is a top priority for Israel to bring back the hostages and to locate and find all those who are MIAs. The effort is on the intel level, on the civilian level, the military levels. We are exhausting every option, and along with that, we're continuing our warfare against Hamas, and we are preparing for the next stage in this war. As we're speaking, the crossing points are closed. No equipment is currently entering the Gaza Strip, and I am going to inform everyone once the IDF and the Israeli government decide otherwise. When you're talking about the efforts regarding the release of all hostages, are you also referring to Israeli hostages who have been held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip for several years? Your question regarding the Israeli civilians and the Shaul family and Golden family who have been in Gaza even since before this current event, and the answer is yes, all those who were abducted. Any more questions? So good evening then, and Shabbat Shalom.
You have been listening to a briefing there from a spokesperson at the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli ministry, the Israeli military, confirming what we have been reporting here at NBC News, confirming the release of those 2 American hostages, 2 women from Illinois. You see their pictures on the left side of your screen. They were released, as we're getting more details now, along the border of the Gaza Strip, taken by Israeli military and security forces, and then transferred to what they describe as a meeting point at a military base in Israel. Their family has been notified. Their family members are waiting to meet them in what is all but certain to be an incredibly emotionally intense reunion. for these people, for this family who had their loved ones abducted by Hamas terrorists in that attack nearly 2 weeks ago. These are the first two hostages, remember, the first two hostages, period, that we have seen Hamas release since this war has begun. I want to bring in NBC News foreign correspondent Josh Letterman in Israel for us. And Josh, some new details there, emphasis on some, but not a lot of context surrounding any kind of insight into the negotiations. Why Hamas at this point decided to let these two people go?
Exactly right. And there are going to be some significant questions in the hours and days ahead, Hallie, about what Israel had to potentially give up in exchange for this, what the prospects are for getting additional Americans released, as well as the other Israeli hostages who are now in the Gaza Strip. But even more so, what this potentially means for Israel's expected ground incursion into the Gaza Strip. Does this change the calculus at all? Does this raise the prospect that if Israel were to hold off on that ground incursion, that additional hostages could come home? And if so, how is that received and deliberated on within the Israeli government? Because we know that Israel has really been gearing up for this. We've seen the tanks and other military assets really amassing on the border with Gaza. And in the last 24 hours or so, we've heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu gearing up these troops to go in. The defense minister telling troops they will soon be seeing Gaza from the inside. But clearly, according to the Qataris, there has been a diplomatic breakthrough here that they believe could lead to even more Americans and other hostages being released. And so that is going to be a major factor, not only for the Israeli government as they decide how to proceed, but also for the governments around the world who also have hostages currently in the Gaza Strip and want to see Israel prioritize bringing those people home safely before there is a ground incursion that could potentially lead to significant casualties, including possibly those of hostages that are now in the Gaza Strip, Hallie.
Josh Letterman live for us there in Tel Aviv tonight. Josh, I'm going to ask you to stand by, and I want to bring back in now our former Tel Aviv bureau chief, our former foreign correspondent here at NBC News, Martin Fletcher. And Martin, as we've talked about here, these two women that have just been released are members of your extended family. They're relatives of your wife's. They live, of course, in Illinois, as we've been talking about here. And without losing sight here, Martin, of the 200 other people, roughly, who remain in Hamas captivity now, kidnapped by Hamas, what an incredible moment for your family here.
I mean, can you believe it? It's like a miracle. We were talking about it yesterday, and we would, you know, would they be human shields? Would they be killed in the invasion, Israel's invasion in Gaza? Nothing good could possibly happen. And then suddenly, bang! I mean, what an about face. And as I mentioned to you before, although the family clearly is celebrating, and I haven't spoken to them in the last half hour, I imagine that's because they're on the way to the border to meet Natalie and Judith. You know, they haven't got time to talk to me. What a moment! But I just need to emphasize, it's not over for this family. I mean, I didn't know this, but while my family also buried somebody who was killed in that attack, October 7, that guy was killed and buried today. His wife is now still a hostage in Gaza. Yeah. So there's another hostage. And it's not only my family, it's like every family involved, because it's such a tiny country, 1 or 2 degrees of separation. And everybody who was caught up in that attack was from a certain kind of people, if you like, people who settled on the border with Gaza, mostly farmers or working locally. A certain kind of person answered the call from the Israeli government in 1967 when the government said, go settle around the newly conquered area of Gaza, create a kind of security buffer zone of kibbutzim and settlements. And that's what they did. They answered that call. And the contract with the government was, we'll live there in that dangerous area and you'll protect us. And that contract between the government and the people collapsed.
Martin, the last time we spoke, I asked you how your wife was doing, because she obviously is the one who's in contact here with some of these relatives. You said she was in tears. I assume tears of joy. How is she doing now?
Well, she couldn't sleep she couldn't sleep for a week. And then she gave me the news, and now tears of emotion. I mean, before she was crying tears of anguish. Now she's, I guess, crying tears of joy. And my wife is not a sentimental, particularly woman. She's a kibbutznik. She grew up in a hard area in the Jordan Valley. She spent 2 years sleeping in a bomb shelter when they were being shelled by the Syrians when she was a child. So she doesn't come from a background of, oh my God, this is terrible. But, tears of anguish turn to tears of joy. And she's the first one that said, that's just our family. What about the rest?
Yeah, and there are so many other families waiting. They hope, they pray for the news that you and your family have received tonight. Martin Fletcher, I'm going to ask you to stand by with so many thanks for bringing us up to speed on developments very much in real time as you are getting those messages, I know, on your phone as we speak. I want to go to the phone now with our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who's been covering this war on the ground in Israel. Richard, the question now for so many of those other families whose loved ones are still being held, is this release a one-off, or is it the very beginning of perhaps the dam breaking and the further release of other people by Hamas?
So I'm in touch with one of the negotiators who's directly involved in this. One of the people who confirmed to NBC News early on that this release had, in fact, taken place. And he hopes that this is just the beginning, that this is just the start. And we have been in touch with Hamas over the last several days about this issue. And Hamas has expressed a willingness to release civilians, to release foreign passport holders, not to release Israeli soldiers. But what we saw today, which changes everything, is that Hamas actually did it. It did it under tremendous pressure. It did it under tremendous pressure from the Arab world. It did it under tremendous military pressure. Right. The group is being attacked relentlessly, day and night, by the Israeli army. It is under threat of an imminent invasion, an invasion that could be launched at any time, an invasion clearly now that is going to have to be recalibrated, recalculated, now that Hamas is showing some goodwill in releasing these hostages. So I think now there's absolutely going to be an effort to use this as a starting point. Those hostages who are now on their way to be reunited with their families undoubtedly are going to be debriefed. What do they know? Were they held with other hostages? What intelligence might they have? What is the condition of the other hostages? And we know that movement is underway on this issue because just a few hours before this happened, the Israeli military, this is the second briefing that you just heard live on television. This is the second briefing that the Israeli military has given about hostages. Earlier today, the military, the IDF, said that it has information that there are about 200 hostages held by Hamas still in Gaza, and that, quote, most of them are still alive. Now, the Israeli military wouldn't announce that itself if it didn't have some sort of certainty, it didn't have proof of life. So there is movement on this issue because we've seen this hostage come out. We've seen these two people on their way out to freedom, and we've heard about the Israeli military just hours earlier talking about how most of them are still alive. So contacts are clearly underway. Hamas said that it did this as a humanitarian gesture, but there is obviously a lot more than that. The group is under military pressure, diplomatic pressure to do this.
Pressure from all sides, Richard. One of the things that we heard in that briefing we carried here live on the air at NBC News from the Israeli military was the idea that the Israelis are gearing up for the next phase of this war. That was made very clear, that there will continue to be military pressure here. You talk about the recalibration, if you will, of what that ground incursion could look like. Explain that. Pull on that thread for us.
So the Hamas had said earlier in the week, and I spoke to a senior Hamas official about this issue directly. We broadcasted on NBC News. Hamas made an offer saying that it would release the foreign hostages, that it would release foreign hostages, meaning like the two people who are just held today, Israelis who also hold foreign passports. It said that it had no issue with them, that they were not party to the conflict that it has with Israel, and it said it would release all civilians, including just those who are purely Israeli citizens. But it did say it would only do that if the airstrikes stopped. It would not do this under fire. What we saw today is it did, in fact, release these two people, this mother and daughter, while still under fire. So Israel kept up the pressure, and these two people are now on their way to be reunited with their families. So that is a change in Hamas's position. It shows that they are under military pressure and reacting to it as well.
Richard Engel, thank you. I'm going to ask you to stay on the line here for a minute while we bring in Jeremy Bash now, former chief of staff at both the CIA and Department of Defense, and an NBC News analyst. So, Jeremy, this is very clearly a moment of de-escalation with the release of these two hostages. Can it last?
If it's a moment of de-escalation, Hallie, I think it's a very small and tiny moment. It's certainly hopeful for the Ra'anan family. It's going to be a joyous reunification for Judith and Natalie with their loved ones who have been so concerned about them. But there are 200 hostages, including as many as 13 Americans. I know someone like Hirsch Goldberg Pollen, who is grievously wounded. He's got Chicago roots. He's an American. I mean, these are families that are deeply concerned about the welfare of these hostages. So, I think 2 is great and every life is precious, but the enormity of this hostage crisis really means that this was in my view, a very small offer or gesture by Hamas or Islamic Jihad or whoever was holding them. And we don't really know why they released them. We don't know if they released them because they had to move positions and it was too difficult to move with the hostages. We don't know if, for example, the Israeli military had them in their sights and there was a potential raid or an operation underway. We don't know the details. And so I think the IDF and the Shin Bet, the Israeli Internal Security Service, is going to first make sure that they're healthy, but very quickly try to debrief these two hostages and try to learn every single thing about their captivity that they can learn.
You have been inside an administration, Jeremy, at moments of critical diplomacy, of critical intelligence gathering. What's happening behind the scenes for the Biden administration at this moment?
Well, they are burning up the phone lines, talking to their counterparts in the region, including obviously inside Israel, but also within Egypt, and also within Qatar, and I would argue the other Gulf Arab countries, including Jordan, that have any influence at all with the terrorist organization Hamas. It's most likely going to be Qatar that's going to have the best line into Hamas, because Hamas's political leadership lives and works out of Qatar, lives and works out of Turkey, and has also relationships with Egypt. And when there has been a need to get messages to Hamas in the past, usually Qatar is one of the go-betweens. And so the U.S. is actively engaged in diplomacy. I think they're also talking to the IDF about the military battle space, about what the ground invasion looks like, or I should say what the counterterrorism operations look like, generally speaking, because part of the counterterrorism operational landscape is going to be hostage rescue. And so making sure we have pre-positioned assets in the region to, if necessary, go in and get these hostages, or if they're released, to provide and render medical care, to rescue them from the border, to reunify them. We don't just kind of hang back and wait for moments to develop like this. We go forward and try to get ready into a three-point stance and a ready posture.
Jeremy Bash, thank you so much. I want to get back to our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who is joining us now on the phone. And Richard, your location, I believe, is along the Israeli-Gaza border here. Talk to us about what else you're learning and where this goes in the days to come.
So according to Hamas, and I could confirm this as well, there was a direct Qatari mediation, that the Qatari mediation is ongoing, that it has been an intense pressure from Qatar to help secure this release. There has also been pressure on Hamas from the Palestinians themselves inside Gaza. About 4,000 of them, according to Hamas's own count, have been killed, and every day we see more images of Palestinian casualties. So there, you get a sense while watching events that are unfolding there, that as the death toll is mounting, there's concern in Gaza that a humanitarian catastrophe could lead to even higher, that these attacks, could lead to an even greater humanitarian casualty. And there is concern around the region that unless this de-escalates somehow, we could be spilling into a much larger Middle East war. It is not over. It is two people. As Chairman Bash was just saying, there are hundreds more held hostages, but there is this hope that once it starts flowing, once you get two, that it can lead to more.
What would your expectation be timeline-wise, Richard, on that, or is that simply a question mark at this point?
Well, I think the full-on ground offensive that Israel has been threatening is certainly now, well, not certainly, but is likely in a pause position, because if Israeli ground troops suddenly start moving into Gaza tonight or tomorrow, just as Hamas is releasing these 2 hostages, potentially more, and as Hamas is providing proof of life with the Israelis saying that they believe most of the hostages are still alive, it would put Israel in a very difficult position if suddenly the tanks started rolling across the border tonight.
Richard Engel, thank you so much for the context, for the reporting there live from the region. This has been a day here at home, a night overseas of incredibly fast-moving developments. We're on top of all of it, and we'll bring you the latest as we get it. That does it for us here for this NBC News special report. But we've got much more ahead on our streaming channel, NBC News Now, also on NBCnews.com. I'm Hallie Jackson. For all of us here at NBC, thank you for watching. See you soon.